Hi there, Kota. My name is Ellen, and I'll be correcting this set of essays for you today. I'm glad to see that you've submitted a set of essays. So let's take a look at what you wrote here. Okay, so we've got eligible voters for each race by state and by year. Okay, let me just make sure I understand this. Okay, got it. So 2 different years and 6 different states. Fine. So quite a bit of information here. Let's see what you wrote. The bar chart indicates the percentage of registered voters in the United States here. The United States. This is incorrect here. So I'll fix this in a minute. In 1965 and 2004, overall, it is clear that the number of qualified Black voters have nearly doubled in all states, especially in Mississippi. The percentage grew approximately 14 times more. On the other hand, the race of white voters have remained the same. Okay, so let's talk about this. First of all, let's talk about what the introduction, the overview is supposed to do. So the introduction is supposed to essentially rephrase and introduce what the task is, what you're looking at. And then the overview is supposed to give us the main, most obvious trend, but no data. So you're not really going to talk about figures. So anything that talks about doubling or tripling or rising by 5 or anything like this that includes any sort of reference to how much something increases is inaccurate. It's inappropriate because that actually belongs in your detail paragraphs. What your overview needs to do is just talk about the main trend. Okay, the thing that's really the most obvious. So, what could you say here? You could say here that while white voters essentially remained the same in the 6 states in question, Black voters increased dramatically. Okay? Or rather, the percentage of Black voters increased dramatically. So that, for me, would be a really good overview. Now, the other thing that I want to talk to you about is your accuracy. You wrote here, let me see if I can find it. Hold on. In United State, of state to state. So that, I didn't understand that at all. What you really wanted to say is the registered voters in 6 U.S. states. Okay? Or in 6 states of the U.S., something like that would have been just fine. Okay? And then again here, so I wouldn't have said nearly doubled. I would have said increased dramatically. Okay? And then again, I wouldn't have said this at all. This didn't make sense. You didn't say the race. You said the rate of white voters. Forgive me. I'm sorry. I read it as the race. No, not the rate, because we're not talking about the rates. We're not talking about speed. So the right word here would have been the percentage, would have been the figure or the proportion of white voters. Those would have been accurate vocabulary words here. All right, let's move on. In 1965, none of the states recorded, without that have, more Black voters than white. Get rid of the the. The largest gap is shown in Mississippi with nearly 10 times more white voters. 7% of Black voters and 70 white. The highest figure for white voters were of Louisiana, followed by South Carolina with 80 and 75, respectively. Okay. Okay. That's fine. I might have started with the highest first. So I might have started with this sentence first and then went to the rest of it. It's just a matter of organization. For me, it seems more logical to talk about the highest number first, and then you can go into this, that the largest gap was shown in Mississippi. I'm assuming Mississippi was the third was the state with the third highest white voters. Is that right? Mississippi. Yeah, it looks like it is. So that's probably what I would have done there. Okay. Okay. In 2004, the black voters, again, no have because it's all in the past. So you're not going to use any present perfect tense here. So in 2004, the black voters, not expanded, again, wrong word. You want to say increased significantly in all states. The proportion turned up, down. I don't understand that. In Mississippi and Georgia with 5 and 2% more black voters respectively. I'm afraid I don't understand what that means. Furthermore, the highest proportion of white voters of 2 years have decreased. I don't understand this. From 1965 in Louisiana of 80% to also Louisiana and South Carolina, both with the same figure of 76. All right, so I'm afraid that, Kota, this has confused me a little bit. Just not clear about what any of this means. So let's talk about this. For me, one of the big problems here is with lack of coherence. There were a couple of places where I was confused, just didn't really understand what you were trying to say. And so that's problematic. It's a short task. And so you need to ensure that your message is clear throughout this short task. Okay, now, as I mentioned to you earlier, it looks like you have what? I think it's 24 pieces of information here. Yeah, I would have to count it up, but I'm pretty sure it's 24 pieces of information. So you cannot and should not mention all of them. But I really felt that in this particular writing, you didn't mention enough. You really missed a lot. So, right. For 1965, you talked about 3 states. 1, 2, 3, and that's it. There were 3 more in 1965 that we have absolutely no idea about. Nothing. Then in 2004, we have this information about Mississippi and Georgia, but it's unclear to us. I just didn't understand what it meant. Okay. Let's see. Did you mention all the states? Let me see. So then I want to talk to you about that. It looks to me, if I'm not mistaken, you didn't mention Alabama, not even once. Now, what does that mean? Basically, you have in this particular task several categories, okay? Your categories are obviously the 2 races, and then there are the 6 states. So all of that information is considered your key information. If you leave out mentioning even one of them, this is really going to drop down your task achievement score because we are not getting an accurate view of this graph. We don't even know what one of the states is. And so if I didn't have this in front of me, I wouldn't be able to know that Alabama was one of the states that was being covered here. And so that's a problem. It's going to really lower your task achievement score. Okay, so that's the first thing. But then I really feel like if I didn't have this in front of me, I'm missing a ton of information. Like I got very little, especially with regard to 2004. So I think you needed to do more here in terms of how you analyze this, as well as how you grouped. Now, this is the kind of task that really lends itself to some good grouping. So I want to show you what I mean. One statement you could have made in your detailed paragraphs about 1965 was in all 6 states, white voters exceeded 60%. The highest percentage was found in Louisiana at 80%, followed by South Carolina at 75%. Okay. And the least were Virginia and Georgia with roughly 65%. Okay. You don't need to mention, what is it that we didn't mention? I think we didn't mention Alabama and Mississippi. Okay, so fine. But you did mention 4 names, okay? Then you can say, with regard to Black voters in those states, Black voters never exceeded 40%, okay? So the states with the top figures were Virginia and South Carolina, with roughly 40. Looks like 40 from what I can see. And Mississippi had the least with only 10%. Okay. Now, again, you have to keep track of this. You have to remember which states you haven't mentioned even once. So then you could go to the 2004 and say something like, let's see. Here you could say something like, by 2004, the percentage of eligible voters registered changed significantly. So you could say white voters in each state were between, see what this number is. It's around, let me see if that's right. No, not this one, sorry. Were between 65 and 75% of the voters. Okay. And then here's a great place where you can mention those states that you haven't mentioned so far. So you could say, including Alabama and, gosh, what was that other state we didn't mention? Mississippi? Maybe. Okay. So you can mention including Alabama and Mississippi. And this way you've covered it. Okay. You've mentioned at least by name all 6 states. And then you could do something really similar for the Black voters. You could say, Black voters increased exponentially in all 6 states. And then you can say, from where to where. And I think a really interesting thing to note out here is the fact that Mississippi is the only state where Blacks not outnumbered, because we're not talking about numbers, we're talking about percentages, but you could say where the percentage of Black voters was higher than that of white voters. So that's how I would approach this. Okay, so this way you're talking about the things that are important. You can give some figures for the Black voters. You can say in some states like Mississippi and Alabama, Black votership surpassed the 70% mark. Okay, and then you can say, in fact, Mississippi was the only state where there was a higher percentage of Black voters than white voters. So you can point out those things. But when you have so much data here, you should include all the things that are important, but not everything, just the things that are important. But you also know how to mention some of these things here that are needed. Okay, so we spent a ton of time on your task 1. Really would like to go on to your task 2 now, which is about international marketing. Okay. So, some people claim that international marketing is required, and a reasonable approach of education. All right, I'm not entirely convinced about this expression. And I'm not entirely persuaded that you want to use the expression on the other hand. It doesn't really go here. We use on the other hand when we've already used on the one hand, and we typically use them here on the one hand and then on the other hand. Here you've used it appropriately, but you need to use it here as well. These two expressions, they must be used together. You can't use one without the other. So I would say no to the expression here, yes to it here, but you also need on the one hand here. All right, so let's go back to this. Some people claim that international marketing is required and a reasonable form of education. However, it is hazardous for the local. Although there are positive impacts of international marketing without that and, I firmly believe that marketing overseas does invade native culture. This essay will analyze both views and use examples of Toshiba and Korea to demonstrate points and prove arguments. Okay, fine. Let's move on. On the one hand, that's where I would put it, the economical impact of global marketing is remarkable and cannot be forgotten in terms of increasing revenue. This is due to the technological advancement of worldwide marketing approaches using the internet and advertisement. For example, Toshiba, the Japanese electronics company, succeeded to triple its sales by becoming one of the biggest sponsors of the Football World Cup in the year 2002. Okay. Their most successful approach was to shoot various advertisements on the official internet site of the World Cup. This fact has not only increased the company Y' revenue, but also showed the economical potential of the marketing. Okay, so you've run into a problem here that a lot of students face. You saw it saying economical form of education, and you misunderstood what they mean by economical. So it's important here to understand that this is this is how IELTS indirectly tests your vocabulary. So you need to know the difference between economic and economical. And yes, believe it or not, there's a difference, and the difference is significant. So economical basically means inexpensive. It means cost effective. And so talking about this and how beneficial this was financially is actually off topic. Okay. And so it's going to affect your task achievement score because you're not talking about how it's an inexpensive form of education, but you're talking just about how it earns money. That's not what you were asked to talk about. Okay. So you can see this misunderstanding of the word is going to cost you task achievement. Okay. Let's move on. On the other hand, an international company affects with an A local culture unconsciously with its victory of marketing. For example, in Korea, many American fast food companies, IES, such as McDonald's, '(S), KFC, 31 Ice Cream, have accounted for more than 60% of the local fast food industries. According to the research of WHO in Korea, this fact has unfortunately led Korean young generations to lose its traditional food diet and the increasing number of medical patients. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you here is again that we're having a problem with task achievement because what you have described for us is not marketing. You've described globalization. You've described international trade. You've described setting up a business in a foreign country, but this is not really marketing. They're talking about a very special, specific subset, which is international marketing. And in other words, how products that were made elsewhere are marketed and how that marketing is changed to target the product into the host country. So all of this again is off topic. Okay. I also felt it was a little underdeveloped. And I'm going to tell you how you can tell when your paragraph is underdeveloped. Look at how long your introduction is. It's 4 lines long. Look at your conclusion, also 4 lines long. Your body paragraph is the same length, and that's just too short. There's no instance where your introduction should be as long as your body paragraph. It means you've done something wrong. Your introduction should be brief, to the point, and I was okay with the length of this, so that's not the problem. So clearly there's a problem with how much you develop this. All right? So let's look at your conclusion. Okay. To conclude, although favorable results without the A can be considered in terms of income, which again we talked about, it's not appropriate. There are many cases where successful international marketing ends up invading other countries without this. Therefore, I believe that the negative influence of the global marketing for the local culture is inevitable with an I. However, due to the current occasion of globalizations is the wrong word here. It is easily predicted that the international marketing will keep overrunning local culture worldwide. Okay. So I think you have a good idea about what works in this set and what does not. we've gone into it. It's about 20 minutes into this correction. So I hope that you find the feedback helpful. I know you've taken IELTS before, and I know you've been struggling with writing. The feedback you got today should give you an idea about the kinds of mistakes you're making in your writing. And I hope you see that, maybe you understand some of the mistakes you've made in the past and understand now how you can overcome them. So I hope we can continue to work together. I'd love to help you prepare and to help you get to that 7 you need. So thank you for sending this in. I hope to see more work from you, and I want to wish you lots of luck.